Good evening. Today is Tuesday, August 29th. The time is 6 p.m. I'd like to welcome you to our special meeting of the Scottsdale Unified School District Number 48 Governing Board. At this time, let's have Vice President Warner lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag. Start off our meeting with a roll call from my far right.
Amy Carney, Libby Hart-Wells, Karen Warner.
And I'm Julie Sanowski. We do have a quorum with 4 of our 5 governing board members present this evening. I'd like to make a motion to approve tonight's agenda. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Dr. Hart-Wells. All in favor to approve the agenda, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. That motion passes 4-0. Thank you. We're going to start with our superintendent's comments. Dr. Menzel.
Good evening, President Sanowski, Vice President Werner, and members of the governing board. I have a brief report this evening because we have a couple of really important presentations that we want to get to. But I want to start by celebrating the Middle School Fall Sports Festival that took place on Saturday. We had 872 students who participated. Boys baseball, there were 317, and girls volleyball, 555 student athletes. I want to give a special thank you to Nathan, Barb, all of the coaches, our security staff, the facility and grounds crews, all of whom helped ensure that the day was a success. So thank you to everyone who participated in the Middle School Fall Sports Festival this year. It's always a joy to watch our students compete and participate. And I just love to see how supportive they are of each other when they're competing. It was a great day. The second thing that I'd like to do is give a shout out to Mr. Dennis Rayler. He's going to be leading a presentation shortly, but what many of you probably don't know is that he is sleep deprived because we had air conditioning failure at Copper Ridge. And in order to get 2 emergency coolers, texts were coming in at 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. Before he was able to go home. But we were able to have school at Copper Ridge, and Dennis and team did an amazing job. So thank you, Dennis, for making sure that our kids could be in school today in a safe environment. So I appreciate that. With that, that concludes my report this evening.
I'm going to turn it back to you, Dr. Menzel, to make the first introduction for our information and discussion item this evening, and that is our SUSD Economic Impact Study.
Well, again, thank you, President Sanowski, and if we can get the slideshow up for this presentation, I'll be covering the first 2 slides as I introduce our presenters tonight. So in 1896, Winfield Scott knew for Scottsdale to be a viable and vibrant city, it must offer premier educational experiences. 127 years later, our goal with this study was to accomplish a couple of things. One, to demonstrate the value of public education in our community, identify Scottsdale Unified School District's return on investment, showcase the benefit that SUSD has on the community and on the economy, and to correct misinformation and control the narrative with respect to public education in our community. Tonight, you will hear from the authors of the Economic Impact Study titled The Economic and Fiscal Impacts of Scottsdale Unified School District and the Value of Their High School Graduates, studied and reported by Seidman Research Institute at Arizona State University, and further examined by Rounds Consulting. And you will find that it validates the extent to which Arizona benefits from our district. The SUSD advantage is the state's economic advantage, creating a lifetime of positive economic impacts that benefit the city, state, county, and state. We want to give a special thank you to Trammell Crow Company and the City of Scottsdale Economic Development arm for seeing value in this endeavor. They provided some funding support and the value that they saw in us. And I still don't see the slideshow, so I cannot advance the slide.
It was up. There it is.
It's gone. There we go. So now I want to introduce our presenters this evening. And before I introduce Eva, I'd like to also note that in the audience today we have Dr. Dennis Hoffman, who is the director of the Seidman Research Institute at the W.P. Carey School of Business at Arizona State University. He's published numerous academic articles and books in the area of macroeconomics and econometrics. He's also a doctoral graduate at Michigan State University, so I just have to give a shout out to the green and white. And joining him and doing the presentation this evening of their research is Eva Madley, an esteemed research economist, also at Seidman Institute, where she is a driving force in economic analysis, focusing primarily on Arizona's dynamic economy. Her areas of expertise span diverse topics, including infrastructure and renewable energy. Eva plays a vital role in shaping economic impact studies and economic-based studies, offering analytical assistance that contributes to well-informed decisions. The other presenter this evening is Jim Rounds, who is the president of Rounds Consulting Group, and they specialize in economic development and education research, in addition to healthcare, transportation, fiscal planning, and more. Jim is a senior fellow with the Goldwater Institute. He is also the president of the Maricopa County IDA, board member at Valley Partnership and the Arizona Small Business Association, and advisor to education-focused groups, including the Arizona Board of Regents and various state universities. Jim is also a proud Coronado Don, and he is a proud part of our SUSD legacy of success. And he may still be in the parking lot, but we're going to start things this evening with Eva. So if you can come to the podium, this PowerPoint should be ready to go.
There you go.
So today's presentation is about the economic and fiscal impacts of the Scottsdale Unified School District and the value of its high school graduates. So almost a year ago, we were approached by Christine to come up with some ideas on articulating the value that the SUSD creates for Arizona and Maricopa County. And there were three approaches that we thought of. The first two are traditional economic impact approaches, simply looking at the expenditure sides. And one involves looking at capital expenditures that were associated with the bond project. The second one is looking at simply annual operations. And the third one is more of a human capital approach. And there we're going to look at the wages and the taxes paid by SUSD graduates who are currently working in Arizona. Now, what is an economic impact analysis? Economic impact analysis are an effective way of demonstrating the total contribution that a company or any economic entity makes to the local or regional economy. And economic impact analysis have three components. The simplest one to look at and assess is the direct effect. There we simply look at the total number of jobs and the wages paid to employees and the purchases made at local businesses. And in some cases, the taxes that this entity pays to local governments. The second layer are the indirect effects, which arise when the school district suppliers hire employees or the suppliers purchase goods and services. And then the suppliers hire employees and purchase goods and services, so we get this snowballing effect in the economy. And the third layer are the induced effects, which occur when workers who are either directly employed by the school district or they are indirectly associated with the school district, like they are employed by the suppliers. So when these people go out in the local economy and spend their incomes on goods and services. The total economic effects are the sum of direct, indirect, and induced effects. And indirect and induced effects represent multiplier effects. They are called that way because the direct effects are multiplied or amplified in the local economy. So if you have any questions, you can interrupt me at any time. Now, what are the metrics we are using to measure economic impact? Impacts refer to jobs, incomes, and tax revenue generated somewhere in the state or in the county. The simplest measure and the most effective one to look at is employment or jobs. And if we just have a one-year impact, we just simply measure the number of jobs that are generated. But if we have an impact that spans over multiple years, we switch to another metric, which is called job years. So, for example, if a person works at a company for 5 years, they represent one job, but 5 job years. So that's the distinction between jobs and job years. Other metrics you will see later in the tables are GDP, or gross domestic product, at the state level, labor income, which includes all forms of employment income, like wages, salaries, benefits, and also proprietor income. In addition to all these, there's another layer represented by fiscal impacts, which arise from the spending of tax revenues received by Arizona state and local governments, which are paid by both businesses and employees directly or indirectly related to SUSD. They include sales taxes, property taxes, income taxes, and other taxes. And while SUSD doesn't directly pay any taxes, its employees do, its vendors do, the suppliers of the vendors do. So in this way, we're creating an additional layer of economic impacts. So we get to our first table. This is the economic impact of operations. And we picked the latest available year, fiscal year 2022. The input data we needed was the annual budget, which was around $245.6 million. And another important component is also the direct employment, which is 2,882 employees. In order to estimate the multiplier effects, we use a software called InPlan, which is widely used nationwide and also in Arizona to calculate economic impacts. So using that software, we can find indirect effects, induced effects, and fiscal effects. In terms of employment, we're reaching total effects of 5,008 jobs. In terms of state GDP, the total is 329.2 million. And in terms of labor income, it's 272.4 million. Now, an interesting metric that can be obtained from this table is the employment multiplier. So if we divide the 5,008 by the direct employment number of 2,882, we get around 1.7. So, which means that each direct job creates an additional 0.7 jobs someplace else in the Arizona economy. And this table is for Arizona. We've also done it for Maricopa County, and the effects are around 90% of the ones you see in the table. So the next component is the economic impact of bond project capital investments. Now, this bond project was approved by voters in November 2016. And we look at 6 fiscal years for which data was available, fiscal year 2017 through fiscal year 2022. And we use, again, the InPlan software, and we obtain results for Arizona and Maricopa County separately. Now, in terms of total employment, these times we report them in job years, so we have 2,323 total jobs in Arizona, job years, I should say, that were created due to the bond project. And in Maricopa County, we have 1,978, again, created during these 6 years. And the type of projects that are included in this capital investment impact includes school site safety measures, the purchase of pupil transportation and campus support vehicles, and the construction or renovation of school facilities. And the direct capital expenditures were approximately $185 million for these 6 fiscal years. And the final component, the human capital related one, here we looked at the wages and state and local government tax payment of Scottsdale Unified School District graduates who are currently working in Arizona. To accomplish this, we used several data sources. We used ASU data, ABOR, or Arizona Board of Regents data, data from Arizona's Department of Economic Security, from the Department of Education. And the core data that these results are based on are wage estimates and number of college graduates from ASU who have graduated between 1990 and 2021 and are currently working in Arizona and are covered by the unemployment insurance program. So starting with these data and all the other data sets, we included U of A and NAU data, and then we added on those with some college or associate degrees, and finally those with just a high school degree. And the grand total of wages comes out to $3.2 billion. And the state and local government tax payments sum $228.2 million. Now, these are the wages and tax payments of all SUSD graduates who are currently in Arizona. So they could have graduated 5 years ago, 25 years ago. If they're still working in Arizona, they will be reflected in these data. And then there are other interesting metrics that our report contains. Like between 2011 and 2022, SUSD had an annual average of 1,868 high school graduates, and 75% of them enroll in college, and approximately 50% will go on to earn a bachelor's degree. And this happens within a 4 to 6 year window monitored by ABOR. And Jim Rounds will have more statistics like these in his report about graduation rates. So this concludes my brief report, if you have any questions.
Want to take questions at the end?
Oh, okay, that works.
Hello, everybody. Jim Rounds. I'm an economic and public policy consultant, SUSD ID 02168. It's funny the things you remember. I couldn't remember a Metallica song I was looking for on the way here while I was stuck in traffic. It was a remake of Bob Seger, Turn the Page. I couldn't remember that, but I remember 02168. Funny how that works. A little bit of background. Since I missed the beginning, and I apologize, there was a bad accident on the freeway. We're often brought in to do public policy analysis related to return on investment. Where might we want to invest extra resources, especially at the state level, but city levels too, and it's been interesting getting involved in education over the last handful of years. We're the Board of Regents economic consultant. We do a lot of work for the other universities. But the main goal is to how can we make investments in certain areas and generate a positive return on investment for taxpayers. I've heard all these years, ever since my original professor in economics, Dennis Hoffman, years ago, peer pressured me into applying for a job down at the Joint Legislative Budget Committee, which I got, and I really love politics, so I stayed in it. We always did a bad job of trying to monetize issues. We did a bad job of trying to apply statistics to things. And that's what we ended up starting to do when I was working with a well-known economist, Elliot Pollack, for 15 years, and I started my own firm about 8 years ago. Policymakers say, let's run government like a business. You can't, but you can bring in business principles. That's why we brought ROI down at the Capitol. No other states, if you look at all the different transcripts, nobody talked about return on investment. Right now I'm seeing it butchered by lobbyists. They don't quite understand what it means. It's a simple concept. But the nice thing is that lawmakers are listening. And I'm giving this background because this is what brought us to the table. There was interest in trying to see if we applied that return on investment analysis to some of the SUSD data, what would that translate into? But you have to remember, there's a lot of things that go into what makes a strong individual, a strong family, a strong school district, a strong business, state as a whole. And unfortunately, what we've seen is that over the years, over the last 2 or 3 decades, one of the best measures of economic performance is per capita personal income compared to the US. And Arizona and the greater Phoenix area were sliding for years. We had a wake-up call after the Great Recession, and a lot of work was put into advancing economic development programs, designing competitive tax policy, and all of a sudden we're starting to see that line move up. But the point is, it took a long time to get to that point. It took more than a decade. When you try to change an entire system, it takes a long time. One piece of work that we did, because we had to bring some attention to the importance of education in economic development. But again, with that, we're using very valuable taxpayer resources. How can we use it the best way? That's an outstanding way of identifying cues. We can come up with 100 different projects that you could be working on, but you want to work on those that'll have the biggest impact, and given your limited budgets. So when we started doing that work, I give a lot of speeches, and I had my opening slide for this particular section was a bumper sticker, and it said, Arizona, let's be average. What would the economic benefits be if Arizona's educational attainment just simply matched the US average, going from high school into college, bachelor's degrees, other things like that? We need workers in all different levels. If all we did was catch up with the US average, the state and local governments would have an extra $500 million more in tax revenue every year. ROI analysis, if you're a business, you would be saying, I could invest money up to that dollar amount and still break even. But you invest that to get to that point, and then you have that benefit going forward. That was our argument to get a number of new economy initiative for the university's projects evaluated. We worked with them, we looked at different things, but the key was to bring in statistics. And you start with looking at different areas. No one study is going to answer all your questions. You have to look at how the stuff that Seidman put together, that we put together, and then some of the comments I'm making now, how does it fit within the bigger picture? And what I'm hoping is that not only have we made a little bit of a dent at the legislature in terms of how can we efficiently spend money, it's how can we also coordinate? You're not going to solve the educational attainment issue. You being a leader in this area, among other districts, could help move the needle some. It's going to take a lot of different groups. No one group is suddenly going to turn it around and all of a sudden educational attainment is going to be at the US average and then exceed the US average, then maybe hit the states that we're talking about. One, that's like a 2-decade plan, but you got to work with others. And the reason that I was excited about working on this project is because it's my home school district. I grew up in Scottsdale. Always been very fond of it, and I always appreciated the work that you all did. So let me just go over some of the basic findings. So we called it the value proposition. This is how we evaluate the return on investment. Well, you take a look at what's being spent and what's the return, and then that's the extra revenue that's being generated. If it's a positive ROI, then you're generating more money than it's costing taxpayers. Now, there's a lot of different reasons for that. I'm a big believer in parental involvement. that has a huge impact on a student's success, but also a quality district, going to a quality university or even a trade school or a community college. Again, everybody's going to be different. Everybody participates, even getting training at your business. I'm an economic consulting firm. We're looking for a particular, we're looking for an economist with some experience. It's really hard to find that. I have to train them probably for 3/4 of the new knowledge that they're going to be getting from us. Even that's part of it. So there's this whole, and I'm not going to say there's a village for my own personal political reasons, but everybody has to be involved in these types of things. So the ROI is what we wanted to focus on to build on to the analysis that even Dennis put together. So the value proposition is the added value, like I just mentioned. Return on investment, I just talked about. What is it costing to educate these students? What is the net gain over some other benchmark? And you can use different benchmarks. We used a state average because that was the area of interest. How much extra value is there that SUSD is producing above the state average? We could use a US average. We could use a lot of different measures, but this was this particular assignment. What we found is that, and these are just, all of the different statistics are documented. There's footnotes in our different memorandums. If anybody has questions about detailed data, probably not the appropriate here at the podium to be going through that in detail, but if anybody has questions, I'd be happy to answer it. Even if there's anybody that's very active in the community that wants to sit down and brainstorm some, be happy to get a beer or have lunch with somebody, or even one of you if you want to hear about this more. The best way to get these improvements is to communicate and get as many ambassadors out there on these issues as possible. So when you take a look at the SUSD, when you compare it to Arizona, which was our assignment basically, 94% graduation rate, 49% earned a degree, 25% for the state. So if you just take the marginal difference, so that increment, you end up with about $170 million a year, or $1 billion over 40 years, a 40-year career. It was a round number, that's why we selected 40. It could have been 45, it could have been 38. 40 is a good round number. What that comes to is, based on what's being spent on education versus what that individual is contributing to the city, to the counties, to the state, you end up with a pretty significant ROI. It's about 5.1, which is $1 billion. Now, that ROI, 5.1, is actually pretty high for an education analysis like what we produced, and it's because the performance of SUSD is so much above the state as a whole. Now, there's, in the different debates that we've had related to how do you do this math, what's appropriate? Well, one, you don't just do one study and one presentation and then it solves all the problems. One, you have to figure out what's the best way to get to where you want to go. You all have metrics. Well, how did you put the metrics together? You thought about what are the important things for parents, what are the important things for you. I'd even like to see some additional statistics brought into it. What would be the ROI of some of these different things that you bring in if you have a particular goal? That's what we recommended for the universities. 2 of them agreed. 1 of them is a little bit more challenging to work with, but I'm not going to say who. It's okay when you always say one person's difficult and one person's okay, as long as you don't identify them, because then if they come back to you later, you can say, I watched that tape. Are we the one that's difficult? I can say, oh no. As long as they're not all together. In economic development, been working on, we do a lot of work with businesses that want to locate here or expand here. We also do work with the communities. We work with the state. We help set incentives. We try to say don't put incentives forward when they're not needed. We even helped with certain lawsuits related to inappropriate incentives in the past. We've helped with a number of different things related to how education is funding. We were involved in the Red for Ed and the tax increase proposal. We happen to be opposed to it. Every number that you saw was our number, but we offered a solution. So there's different ways of doing it. You can be opposed to something, but it's great if you can also offer a solution rather than just complain. When we had a lot of these meetings in the past, SUSD was brought up a number of times. When somebody said, I'm a little concerned about the educational attainment statistics, they said, well, let's show you some SUSD numbers. That was always one of the default examples that we had when they talked about education. Back in the day, a lot of it had to do with low-cost labor. Now we're moving into the realm of we need high-quality labor. That's why we need to make some strategic investments, and that's why I feel like my old district, Mr. 02168, would love to see everybody here highly involved in a lot of the brainstorming. I would like to hear back from you personally on what are you seeing at this particular level, because we're in the thick of things at the Capitol and trying to get things implemented, new public policy programs. But what I found is that some school districts are very interested in having those discussions, some aren't. Last example. I was getting a little bit frustrated. My son is in his second year at ASU Barrett's. I didn't know, even though we're very attentive parents, I didn't know that he had 40 credit hours at ASU already done before he graduated. Okay, well, maybe that needs to be promoted a little bit more. So we did some math related to the programs to try to expand that. I love those types of programs. But I would like for individual districts to get excited about some different public policy things. What I found out was, because he was having a difficult time and I happened to just be presenting to a number of superintendents in one of the organizations, I went ahead and called the superintendent in Kyrene and said, hey, there's something going on here. Can you just look into it? And I usually never do that, but in this case, it was important to me. And I found out that the counselor was just greatly overworked. It was very difficult for them. The prior year, we recommended that we spend a few dollars and have a couple of pilot programs, because I wanted an economic development officer, kind of a workforce training counselor that was 2/3 workforce training and trained in economic development, and 1/3 with the normal counseling. And then we also trained the current counselors a little bit in economic development, 1 extra counselor per school, but the ability to maybe direct them at the right resources. That same district that I complained about said, we would love to try to implement that. We're going to try to find some money internally. I ended up purposely stalling that because my concern was that if the legislature thought that every school district can suddenly find money for a program like that, or if one could, then everybody could. So this is something that I'm still trying to get funding for, because I think that would have a massive, massive ROI. These are the things that you think about when you do these studies. Now, you heard Ava go through a lot of different data points. You're going to forget about a lot of them. You heard me, and you've seen our analysis, you're going to forget a lot about that. But what you're going to remember, though, is that SUSD is outperforming most of the rest of Arizona, but there's always room for improvement. And so if we could keep improving, that's the measure. Can you improve over where you were before? I would love to say, I'm going to go ahead and train as hard as I can to dunk a basketball. I couldn't do it when I was 40 pounds lighter and at the peak of my fitness level. It would be a waste of time. But I could say, I want to get back on my mountain bike and start riding the trails at Papago Park again like I used to 10 years ago, something that's realistic. When we set goals and comparisons, they have to be reasonable, but you also have to keep them somewhat aggressive. How are you informed on these things? Through these types of statistics. You should be proud that SUSD is outperforming most of the state. You should be proud that there are certain schools that are greatly outperforming the rest of the state. But then there's even a concern about my old school, Coronado, which has very low performance. We have a major poverty issue. Everybody calls it a Hispanic issue, it's a poverty issue. We have to resolve that. That gets resolved with a big emphasis at the state level, supported by districts and the education system as a whole. You can't lead that, you can't afford it. But if you're informed on that and you keep that top of mind, you'll know when to participate. So, and I actually watched a number of the different hearings. You talk about a lot of different things, and what I really liked is that every single one of you was passionate about multiple things in each meeting and very vocal. I've been in meetings like this where there's very little discussion. Maybe there's 1 or 2 people that talk. So this is a little bit of, you're doing well. I think you can do better. I think the planning can improve. Use statistics, use math. Be intelligent with it and try to be a leader on this going forward. And like I left that the red line at the bottom, the work's never done. Everything that we're talking about, even though we said you have a good ROI for taxpayers, that can be improved upon. There's a lot of things that can be improved upon. I'd like to see Coronado's performance increase. I would like to see other schools' performance increase, but I would like to see that across the state. It's a partnership. You can't carry the weight of the world on your shoulders, but you could be a part of the group that's trying to do it, and I really encourage you to be a leader in this area. And that's it for me.
Well, Thank you, Ms. Madley and Mr. Rounds. Really appreciate the information that you presented this evening. At this time, I'm going to open it up for questions and comments from the other governing board members. Dr. Hartwells.
Thank you, President Snowski. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, maybe pull it up a little bit. There you go.
Is that better?
Yes.
I have a few questions for Ms. Madley. We're going to.
Eva is very capable of handling your questions as well. But I thought, given that I had come here, I wanted to reinforce just one point, and then I'll take your question. In studies like this, there's lots of estimation going on. There's lots of modeling, which means we're trying to tease out of models and tease out of data quality estimates. But what drives your economic impact report with respect to your wage profile, and then Jim took the wages, the 3.2 billion that we start with, and then Jim took these wages and calculated ROI. I want you to picture where this comes from. Eva does an annual report for ASU. It's based upon data that we get from the unemployment insurance system. Literally, we can't see who is who, but the ABOR literally takes an entire array of Social Security numbers from students that have graduated from the state's 3 universities. We put them through, or the DES puts them through, the unemployment insurance system. And we get actual wages for people in these various cohorts. If there's a Social Security number, somebody went to ASU or U of A back in 2000, but they're working in Seattle now, they're not going to show up in this study. They don't get counted. So we're controlling for leakages out of state, and we're not estimating wages. But we use this quality data on college graduate wages to inform everything throughout this study. So it's probably a bigger deal to me than it is to you all. But there are so many studies where you just have to rely on estimates, and you kind of have to go, well, we'll take our best shot. This is real live data that we've informed this with. And I apologize for that, but let me take your question.
Go ahead, Dr. Hartwells.
Thank you. Well, first, at the outset, thank you both and your organizations for the analysis. It confirms a lot of what we all had suspected as family members and parents in this community. But a couple of specific questions. You talked about data. I don't know if we can go back to the slides. Can we get to slide 7?
That's the one I was
Is it Jim's or ours?
wanting to reference to, slide 7.
There were 4 inputs here, and then the total economic impact calculated. Oh, there we go.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. There were 4 inputs. Were they equally weighted?
Is what equally weighted?
And the
Direct,
total economic
indirect?
impact is just a summation of the 4 inputs at equal weight? There's no relative weighting?
No. No, this is think about a payroll. A direct effect is like a direct payroll. And what we do is we model that payroll, what impact that has on the geography, on the economy, because we pay employees X dollars. We pay, in this case, 2882 employees directly. And then we model what happens when they get their incomes and they spend it in the economy. So there's no relative, it's more just straight arithmetic. We talk about the indirect effects, the induced effects, and the taxes that are paid along the way, and we just sum up all of the 3 effects to get the total economic impact.
Okay, so it's just a summation. There's no relative weight. How many data points do you recall an approximate, or how many data points?
See, and I thought I
Fed
could
into the
handle
model?
this. I thought I could handle it. So how many data points fortunately, we have the person here that did all of this. So how many, we took payroll statistics from SUSD, from the public reports, from the budget statistics for fiscal year '22, and we calculated the aggregate direct effects, and then we modeled that.
You don't recall?
We had a large file with vendor transactions, so that was large file to process. It had thousands of entries.
So thousands, maybe not 10,000s?
Yeah, maybe.
Okay,
I
and
think
the,
it was even over.
okay. And just to alleviate any potential concern of the staff, these were animatized data, right? All right, okay, just concern. And then slide 9, I think, or slide 8, just the next one, please. I want to understand this a little bit more, this slide. Can you, in terms of the conclusion, to pull away the next slide, please? That's 7 million, 8?
Could I advance here, or how does it work?
Okay, yep, there we go. Very good. So this is very important because our community votes to basically tax itself. So I think it's very important to understand what the takeaway, the conclusion from this slide. You have your kind of the inputs or the results here, but what's the conclusion? If we could sum it up to our community members, the impact on the bond that they supported
Okay. I
as a
think This is
taxpayer.
more political, I guess. So if I'm a voter in Scottsdale, and I think, if I'm gonna vote for this, what is it? This is just, the school's gonna go off and spend, it's not gonna affect me at all. Why? Because I run a restaurant in Scottsdale, or I do have another business in Scottsdale. I'm not in the school construction business. But people that are in the school construction business, people that put this capital in place, earn incomes, and they spend money, mostly locally here in Scottsdale, but throughout Maricopa County. And they spend, this is the kind of the classic question, why do economists get excited about a manufacturing plant? Or why do we get excited about capital being put in place? Why don't we worry about small business? It's because those first two things drive small businesses. So that actor, that voter in Scottsdale reaps benefits from this capital investment economically. And that sets aside all of the benefits that accrue from education, of course. The fact that these buildings are needed to produce human capital that works at their businesses, et cetera. Does that help?
Yeah, so what I'm trying to get to is kind of where you were headed, which is the return on the bond investment by the taxpayers does return to them, whether you are a family, you have children in the district or not, there is an impact regardless of the kind of acute
Right.
fact pattern.
You see that in the GDP numbers, you see it in the labor income numbers, and those are aggregates that she's got indirect and induced effects all combined there. And she's got total employment as well. And that employment is all employment. That's employment building the buildings, putting the capital in place, but also jobs that are created downstream to some of those people that supported or didn't support the bond initiative.
Right, so that life cycle, right? It's a continuous life cycle. So there's a direct and indirect benefits to our
Right.
community and the
That's
state
correct.
as a whole when we make these kind of community-wide efforts.
That's correct.
That's my walk away. I just want to make sure that that's an accurate conclusion. Okay. All right, thank you. I don't have any more questions at the time. Thanks again for your work.
Thank you, Dr. Hartwells. I'm going to give you a summary to your question, Dr. Hartwells. Protect our district public schools, support our district public schools, and invest in our district public schools. Whether you have kids or not in a school district, you are benefiting as a member of an educated society And this is proof of it, this data is. So I appreciate this information. I do have a question for,
Jim?
shoot, Mr. Rounds, yes.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. You had mentioned that you do work with the JLBC, is that right? Or you have worked with them in the past?
JLBC is where I cut my teeth out of college, and I still give the economic presentation at their meetings. The next one on the budget is coming up in October, and it's worthwhile looking at that because you'll get a better picture of what kind of revenues are going to be in and if the shortfall that's being discussed is real or not.
Okay, I'm just going to make a comment. I do appreciate the work of the JLBC, and I've noticed in the last probably 5 years, maybe 10 years, that there has been more of a reference to this in legislative work and decisions. But I'm going to push you on this a little bit. What kind of evidence do you have that the decisions are considering, the decision makers, our legislators, are considering this type of information when we talk about ROI and what the schools actually do generate from a state and county and local level?
Because I see projects that we work on every year get implemented, the bills pass. We saw a significant increase in the more complicated bills passing. It was with healthcare, higher education, and now there's more discussion about what's happening with the school districts. You go in, I'm not a lobbyist, but I get asked questions all the time, or I'll attend a meeting with a lobbyist, and we'll sit down with the lawmakers, and after we're done and we show them the numbers, then they'll either vote on it or they won't. But if you're calculating things where you're providing a positive return for taxpayers, that means that there's extra revenue coming in later beyond the costs to spend on additional programs. Checkbox Democrats. Or it could be used for reducing taxes or something else. Checkbox Republicans. If you do it based on their original argument that was run government like a business, again, you can, but if you bring in these principles, you see things pass.
I appreciate that. I wish we could have a vision of being, well, above average, not where we are, which is well below average, almost in the basement. So we'll keep plugging along because I understand that this is important, and I think everyone here does as well. And I hope, so I'll ask you this, how do we do a better job as a district to communicate the facts to the general public?
General public would be different than to lawmakers, which would be different than the business community.
Sure.
You might want to have a discussion about to what extent are you involved in each of these different groups. You having meetings like this open to the public, you're already getting public feedback. To what extent are you involved? And we've talked about this with the different groups that I present to, like the particular group of superintendents, things like that. They want to get more involved. And so the key is to have more events. That analysis that we did for the Board of Regents and the business community, calculating that extra $500 million, I've included that slide in about 100 presentations so far.
Good.
I'm not going to ditch that thing until we get more interest, but we're already seeing the interest. We're seeing the extra investment. When we worked with the universities on the New Economy Initiative, we actually took the time to look at their requests. We calculated the ROI, helped them queue it, and then they redid their budget request. Had a huge engineering expansion at ASU, which was great, which was needed for a lot of the new semiconductor plants that are going to be opening in a lot of different areas. But we need people. I heard a great statement by a really smart person today where sometimes you need a PhD, sometimes you need a plumber. We are not overproducing bachelor's degrees. We're actually underproducing it significantly. But the key is to have people that wouldn't have graduated from high school graduate. Those that just would have done that go get a technical degree or go to community college. Everybody moves up that ladder. That's how you increase income. You don't do it artificially by raising like a minimum wage to an unrealistically high level. It has to be competitive because there's some inefficiencies in the market. But if you do it right, that's what grows wealth, and that's what benefits everybody. That per capita personal income statistic, that thing only has to start ticking up a little bit before you start to see that, and it's not trickle down, it's spread to other individuals. I'm an economist, and I'm considered, I guess, marginally like an executive. I spend money on the way home. I help that McDonald's person because I stopped and got a coffee. I helped at Walmart because my wife really likes to get plastic containers, and She gets them from Walmart and I pick them up. We help create jobs there. So really, everybody benefits, but you got to understand how this works. And one thing we recommended to the universities, like I mentioned, is I'd love to see different goals monetized, because that'll help you prioritize which ones might have the biggest impact. Some of them you can, some of them you can't. Sometimes you have to do the right thing. There was a person that was outside my work complex a little while ago, and he really looked beaten down. I went and I got a breakfast and I gave it to them. I wasn't making money for it. Sometimes you just got to help people. That's part of what government does as well. But you can be careful with taxpayer money. That gets back to the Goldwater Fellow part of me. There's a way of finding a balance where you're truly helping people and you're being careful with taxpayer funds.
Appreciate that comment. Thank you. That's all that I have. Do any of the rest of the governing board members have any comments or questions for our presenters? Doesn't look like there are any. Thank you again very much. I know it'll take some time to sink in, so I appreciate the opportunity to reach out to y'all if we have other questions. Thanks.
Sounds good.
And we are going to move on to 4B, our Bond Oversight Committee. Dr. Menzel?
Well, thank you, President Sinowski. Thank you again, Dr. Hoffman, Eva, and Jim for presenting the economic impact study. And there's a nice segue between the impact of the bond expenditures from 2016 and what Dennis Rayler and the Bond Oversight Committee will present this evening. And so without further ado, Mr. Rayler.
Good evening, President Sinowski, members of the board, Dr. Menzel. Yes, I am absolutely, technology, stop playing with my video. Absolutely exhausted today, but it was well worth the effort overnight to get Copper Ridge going. So kind of a great segue from that study to the work that we've done. And one of the things that we heard, I heard, Shannon heard from the Bond Oversight Committee over and over again is that we need to tell our story. We're doing great work in the district. We need to tell our story, the specific story of the bond, the work that we're doing, the improvements that we've done to our school. So as we head into our final year of the bond, we've got about $5 million worth of work left to do. We thought it appropriate to kind of celebrate the work that the Bond Oversight Committee has done, do a little bit of showing off. And so I'm going to actually be quiet for 4 minutes and 53 seconds, which you'll never have happen again, and show you a video. And that video is courtesy of Everett Hayes, our drone pilot, and Sean Michelson, a former Arcadia student that is still an intern with us while he is attending ASU for his first couple of weeks now. So if you sit back and relax and enjoy this video for a moment.
exhausted.
Oops. Thank you. Yeah, that was the easy part. So, pushing the, yeah. I'm just, we finished up Pueblo. Well, you saw that it wasn't quite finished. We will be finished in October. McCarthy's been a great partner getting that one done in a very short time frame. We expect that the rest of the parking lot and the turf area, which was all that dirt, will be ready to go in October into November. We'll obviously be transitioning the seasons, and so grass is our current concern in making sure that we have grass to play on November through the spring. So we're hoping that we can get that nailed in. But the Mother Nature and her monsoon or lack thereof has been very helpful to the Pueblo project in getting that done. So I've got 3 members of our Bond Oversight Committee here. The Bond Oversight Committee was established back in 2016. There was a lot of work that was done in preparation for the bond, and we'll go through that. But I want to acknowledge our Bond Oversight Committee members that are here, and they'll have an opportunity to speak at the end of the presentation. So here in the room, Mr. Wally Graham, Mrs. Nikki Torito, and Mr. Mike Norton. You can see that we had a fairly good-sized group. Each one of them represented a learning community and had their own interests within the Bond Oversight Committee. It was well-attended most of the time, certainly after I took over. There was some drama early on, and we got past that. And I think the last 4 or 5 years, it's been going extremely well. A little bit of history for the bond, and back in 2016, the communications department, Ms. Christine Harrington and her team put together this bifold marketing product that helped the voters understand what it was that we were going to be doing with the money that they were voting on. A picture of the new Tavon Elementary front office building. It wasn't showcased in the video. We just did the full rebuild campuses, but Tavon has seen a tremendous amount of work in the last 15 months. Then we have the voter pamphlet, and that is what we are bound by law to adhere to. There are 3 lines on that pamphlet: the remodels and rebuilds at $219,910,000, the school site safety at $3,090,000, and then the student transportation at $6 million. So we've been working really hard these last 7 years to make sure that we're adhering to that, making sure that we're not overspending in one area or the other. It has been very difficult as I look back, and as Wally had shared with me or reminded me that 3 of the last 6 years have been in COVID. And if anybody is in the industry, trying to build buildings, trying to order products, it has been extremely challenging. Even as recently as today, the industry has not caught up as we are looking for chiller replacements for Copper Ridge. The contractor that we're working with said that the chillers would be 52 weeks out. 52 weeks. You got to order something and wait a year. So it's still a struggle in a lot of areas. And Wally reminded me that we really need to be proud of that effort, that it was no small task. If you reading Elise White's quote in the video, we did the visioning committee for Kiva absolutely 100% online. There was no face-to-face opportunities because of COVID, and somehow we landed on that beautiful school we call Kiva. Kiva and McCarthy had their challenges because of the work that was happening during COVID, but we did get through it. They rebounded fantastically with Pueblo, knocked it out of the park early, got teachers and the staff in earlier than we had anticipated, and I think we've gotten off to a great start over at Pueblo. So after passing the bond in November 2016, SUSD set out to kick off the rebuild of Hopi and Pima. Those happened right away, right out of the chutes. The district's approach at that time was not fantastic, and the community let us know. And so fast forward a year, and a new administration, a new bond leader, myself, and the bond oversight committee that was resolute from day one before the bond was actually passed, that they wanted to see transparency. They wanted to make sure that we were doing things the right way and that the taxpayers would be able to see that. So again, 3 years of COVID, Hohokam, we built that one just as COVID was rolling around. Cherokee, we were well into construction. I think we were into the second phase before COVID impacted us, but two absolutely fantastic schools. One of the things that we heard loud and clear from the Hohokam community was we want our Ralph Haver architectural design in those buildings preserved. And so despite it costing a little bit more money to do that, that's what the community wanted. And our architects, SPS Plus architects, did a fantastic job. Chase Building team did a great job executing, but a great design, something that they really enjoy today. So some of the things that we learned from 16 to 17 and needed to make sure that we corrected that, and the Bond Oversight Committee was absolutely insistent that we did. We started the visioning committee process. And I think I'll wear that as my badge of honor for the bond, is that we put that process together. It started with Cherokee with Orcott Winslow, and we made sure that we had the community members, the staff members. Chief Wingert at Paradise Valley PD was on the committee, and we really made sure that we were listening to the community. We made sure that we were hearing them and that we were incorporating that into our designs. Community, parents, staff input was absolutely paramount. We had to make sure that that was a big part of it. The Bond Oversight Committee met quarterly, and each meeting we went over the work that we had done along with the work that we were proposing to do. As part of that transparency piece and as part of the telling our story, if you will, I went to my team and a couple of our interns that are now off into the real world. Gatlin Farrington is now with Garmin, and he was the one that I said, you know, I'm looking for a way to tell our story. I literally wanted to turn the page like a book. And next thing you know, he was a Chaparral High student, and next thing you know, I've got a book, and it's called Sway. And that's available online. You can find it on our bond website, and you can flip through the pages and go as superficial as you would like and just look at the pictures of the work that we've done, or go as deep as you'd like, click on one of the links and go into our smart sheet and look at all the projects and all the backup information for those projects. We don't hold anything back. There's POs in there, there's invoices in there, there's proposals in there. Everything associated with the projects is in Smartsheet for anyone to look at to make sure that we've done our job. I mentioned Smartsheet. Smartsheet was a brainchild of a former administrator. And once I started digging into it, I thought, wow, this is really going to be a good opportunity to share the information with our community. So it identifies every project. At one point, we had 594 lines in Smartsheet. Some of them, multiple lines, were tied to one project, but generally speaking, there were a lot of projects. Each project's documents are available, like I said, in Smartsheet. If you are in Smartsheet, you look to the left column, there's a little paper clip. You click on that, and that'll bring up all the documents. So that's a view-only version of the document, but absolutely welcome for anybody to go take a look at it. By law, we have to do our annual bond expenditure report to the governing board, and then as Dr. Menzel came on board, the request was that we audit one of our projects. And so Holcom was the project that was audited through the City of Scottsdale's audit department. And Dan Collinsworth, one of our former project managers, and myself felt a little hurt. We thought we were doing a good job, and they showed us that we were doing an okay job. And so we looked at that all very closely, and we implemented new processes for managing our contractors, managing our contracts. And I think you can ask Core Construction and McCarthy both that our pay application process is now as difficult as any out there because we make sure they show absolutely every penny, and every penny is approved before we spend it. So some of the projects that we've done over the years, and this is by no means all of them, there's $3 million worth of focus on school security. That's not nearly enough. When we start considering the opportunity for a new bond, we will look at even more campus security. But one of the things that almost every security professional will tell you is to keep the bad guy at bay. Buy yourself some time. Keep them to the exterior. So that was our focus, and when COVID did strike and we decided not to come back after spring break, we kicked it into gear and remodeled 18 front offices before the end of the summer. So that was from March until the end of summer, and we did all of those remodels. Hardened the front offices without making them look like a prison. I think they're still all very welcoming, but they will definitely buy us some time if a bad guy's at the front door. Standardized intercom systems, clock systems, door locks, lock from the inside. One of the worst things that we had going on for us was locks that we had to open the door to lock with a key on the outside when you're in a high-stress situation, figuring out, do you turn to the left, do you turn to the right? So we've taken care of all of that. We still do have some doors that you have to lock with a key, but they lock from the inside. We don't have any schools that you have to go outside to lock the door. Well, a lot of the things that people tend to notice, flooring, exterior paint, obviously our high school stadium synthetic turf and track and field projects, some of the best athletic fields you'll find in the state. Parking lot renovations, no one gets real excited about those, but they certainly do make life a little bit easier. And then, of course, our electronic marquees that we put throughout the district, and Pueblo is the last one. They'll get theirs here in the next couple of months as we finish out that project. So looking ahead, the bond oversight committee members, while they love hanging out with me all the time, they're done. They're ready to move on. They've put in their time. They've put in a lot of effort. And so we're going to be working towards transitioning them out and a new group in as we look to close out, pass on their knowledge, leave something for the new folks with the work that they've done, and then start looking forward to what's next as far as capital improvements for the district. We need to build a future capital improvement plan. There is only so much money that comes from the state, and so at some point, we will need to go back to our voters and ask for more money. If anyone's even a little bit curious, the central plant repairs that we're gonna do at Copper Ridge will cost us about $500,000. So it's not cheap. Nothing's cheap. As you know, we passed, you recently approved some contracts that the School Facilities Board is funding, and roof projects, 2 roof projects at the high schools at $7 million each. So there's just not enough money coming from the state to do all of the work that we do for our campuses. So we will continue down the path of collecting and asking for community input. What is it that you want for your schools? How do we make your schools better? What is it that we can do to provide all of the tools necessary for our staff and our students to learn in a great learning environment? So at this point, I'd like to invite our Bond Oversight Committee members over to speak. I know that Wally is just super anxious to tell us all about what he is seeing as far as our improvements and our financial accountability. So we're going to have, I'm going to step away from the mic, but Mr. Wally Graham, Ms. Nikki Torito, and then Mr. Mike Norton, also on the bond committee, would like to say a few words. So I'm going to leave it up to them at this point.
Good evening, members of the board, Dr. Menzel. Good evening to all the parents, and if there are students out here, I hope there are students. I'll tell you all a little bit about myself in a few minutes, but I do a lot of board development work and have done for the last 35 years as a part of my payback for the public education I got. And I tell students to go to board meetings so they can see what happens in board meetings. Then you'll learn something about leadership, or you'll learn something that you shouldn't be doing as leaders. So I tell them to look for both. Anyway, my background is in operations, manufacturing, but now I do consulting work. I've been doing that for 38 years now. And I've been working with school districts for 35 years. I work as far away in Arizona as Chinle, up on the reservation, and it's become one of the top, well, it is the top reservation district in the state. I've worked with the Scottsdale Unified School District and many, many others in and around the city of Phoenix. And I'll tell you that I'm proud to be here tonight because what you all have accomplished, and when I say you all, it's the Scottsdale Unified School District. What you all have accomplished is textbook with regard to the way that transformations ought to happen. There became a person or people who started to envision what it should look like when bond money, capital money is spent wisely. And what you saw from Dennis's video, and I love that video. I did a video back in 1983. Orson Welles was the narrator, and I did it for a little chip company that I worked for because we were building a whole new plant and transforming the company. So we used Orson Welles to narrate. And so we'll have to get an Orson Welles kind of narrator on your video because that's an excellent video that really talks about the things that you ought to be proud about and the things that you ought to be smiling about and the things you ought to be bragging about. I like boards that brag about the things that are happening in their district, not all the things that are going wrong, but what's happening that's going right. And John Cotter, he's a retired Harvard Business School professor, wrote a book called Leading Change. Everybody here ought to read Leading Change. Because John has this 8 steps, and some of those 8 steps have to do with a little bit of what Dennis talked about today, and that is building a guiding coalition. That's one of the steps. And so in 2016, somebody got an idea to bring a group of people together to do bond oversight. And we didn't get direction, we didn't get guidance. We simply jumped into the job and we started doing things and trying to make things right. We had some upsets, as you all know. 2017, 2018 were bad years for us, and things happened that I would not put in a guideline or a guidance book for making organization change, but they happened. The board, luckily enough, stayed out of most of what we were doing as the Bond Oversight Committee, and they allowed things to change. They did have to get some new leadership, and they did that wisely. We got Dr. Creekard in, who came in and did an interim thing, and then we got Dr. Menzel, who's kept things going. So I am proud of, and I'll give you 5 things that have happened. One is our Bond Oversight Committee is made up of a very diverse group of people. And when I say diverse, I mean in terms of personalities. You want to see some real personalities? Bring us all together. There are 8 of us. We're all different. And we all speak, and we all have knowledge, and we all have opinions about how things should work. But we don't get there and fight and arm wrestle. We try to find ways to bring that guidance toward the 2 people who help us most, and that's Shannon Crozier and Dennis Rayler and their staffs. We just give them thoughts and opinions. We're not bobbleheads. We don't sit in the back window of a car and just do, What we do is we work through things, and we've gotten things well done. And so here's some of the things that have happened. One is SUSD, Scottsdale Unified School District, does an excellent job of caring for the capital assets that provide services to students. We care for those capital assets. Every time a capital event comes up, we want people out there saying they take care of our money. And about 4 years ago, people were questioning if we did our job. There were probably, if this room, well, I forgot where we were, which facility we were in, but we had 300 or 400 people. I'm over in the Arcadia learning community. And we had 300 to 400 people in a board meeting one night, in several nights, because things were not going well. Well, what Dennis and Shannon and Dr. Menzel and others have kept going is they're starting to listen to people in the community. We're not telling them what to do. We're just trying to give them guidance, advice, thoughts about what we need. SUSD has also done an excellent job of opening the reports. I work with a lot of school districts, and I will tell you there's not another school district in the state that has a website as good as ours with regard to bond and capital expenditures. We can show you pictures, we can show you dollars, specific things that were spent, and it's up there every month. You don't have to wait until the end of the year or wait until the capital has been spent. It's up there. There is no other school district in this state that has the kind of detail that we have. And if you go up on that site, you can find how our money is being spent wisely. The third thing is SUSD involves parents and neighbors by forming visioning committees and reports out regularly on the projects with those committees being involved. That's not something that happens in most school districts. People just show up, the contractors show up, you get what you get, you come through the door when they do the grand opening. The fourth thing is SUSD adapted and devised ways to complete projects on or below budget, despite COVID, product shortages, delays in shipments, and lack of labor. I work with a lot of contractors. I do a lot of work with big developers, And I'll tell you, everybody had a tough time. SUSD worked through those factors because we had leadership like Dennis and Shannon who said, here's what we're doing. This is how we're spending. This is where we're going. And I hope you all will continue to support that kind of work through Dr. Menzel and allow those things to happen. My last thing is just to, on behalf of members of the BOC, and I'm not speaking for the whole committee, I'm speaking for myself, but I want to recognize those people that Dennis had listed up there, and you'll hear from Nikki in just a minute as soon as I get off of here. Nikki Torito, Stuart Roden, Lisa Canaris, Mike Norton, Mike Peabody, Nancy Cantor, and Jose Vallarde. All of those folks have put their hearts and our effort into this volunteer work. And we want you all to continue to support that effort and continue to have that going. Please don't mess the transformation up. And Carter will tell you how the 8 steps or 8 things you can do to screw up a transformation. You all really have a transformative thing happening with bond and capital money. And I hope you will continue to advertise it, support it, and talk to people about it. So thanks a lot for what you've done. Continue to support the work. I just am crazy about having experienced it and seen it from the other side, not being a consultant and facilitator, but seeing it as a member of the team. So thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
Hello, I'm Nikki Torito. I am a parent in SUSD. I have an 8th grader here at Mojave, and my daughter just went to college. Just took her down 2 weeks ago. So she graduated from Saguaro. It's been interesting with them. The schools have been great. So yes, as Wally said, the bond committee, and as Dennis hinted towards also, it was formed during a bit of a difficult time. During SUSD, morale was low in the district and community support was waning. But through the committee and many other parents and community members and efforts, all of their efforts, things turned around, which is awesome. And our committee has the opportunity to be a part of the change and witness the positive transformation that Dennis and Shannon have led for us. They've always been there during the meetings and helped, given us all the information we need and anything we asked for. So now I can honestly, truly say that SUSD is a trustworthy steward of the bond monies funded by taxpayers of Scottsdale, and that the money was spent honestly and wisely to build safe, functional, aesthetically pleasing learning sites for our children and staff. I'm proud to have been a part of the work and the struggle of this committee. And it brings me to my second topic that Dennis asked me to talk about, and that's the visioning committees, which I was a part of. I was on the Pueblo Visioning Committee. It was a great experience, and it really began, it was a great group. It was very diverse: parents, teachers, administration, community members. The architect leads the meetings, or at least they did at Pueblo. The contractor was there as well, so any questions you had were answered. It began with a very broad kind of overview that the architect would come in, asking their first question was, did we want to rebuild Pueblo, or did we want to level it? Do we want to level it, or do we want to renovate it? So that was the first question, and everybody in the room is like, well, we wanted to level it because it was gross. And so those were the kind of questions that they would ask. They said, was there any aspect of the old building that you wanted to keep, that you wanted to remain? Was there some room that meant something? No, take it all down, please. Just leave the Pueblo Pride Rock. That was the only thing we wanted. It's still there. So they started really broadly, and it was really interesting to be there. And then through the course of a few months of meetings, probably we met probably it was once a month, we moved more to the nitty-gritty details. And at Pueblo, we were telling the architects what we wanted to see. They were showing us drawings. They were showing us renditions. They were amazing. We wanted lots of natural light. We wanted lots of colors. We wanted an improved parking lot and drop-off situation, which they're still working on, but it's going to be awesome. We wanted a front courtyard for the parents to gather and pick up. We wanted the Pueblo Pride Walk, which we still have. And we wanted a lot of shade structures. So if you tour Pueblo now, they listened. It's amazing that the community came together and they had this vision that we wanted. And as former Pueblo parents, as community members, and they listened, and we got it all. And Dennis does not like multiple colors on a building, but we have it. See, look at his expression. He does not like it. But Pueblo is full of color. There's colorful tile inside. It's beautiful. It's exactly what we had hoped for and what we were looking for. The committee did not get to choose the light fixtures. We didn't get to choose the plumbing fixtures, but we got to work on the overall feel and function of the building, and then they let the nitty-gritty go to the teachers and the administration, which was totally what was expected. So what I've been hearing from the Pueblo community, it was a great success. The committee got everything they were hoping for, and it really was a true collaboration. And that just speaks to the work that Dennis did with the architects, with the builders, and it was an amazing experience. I just took a tour of Pueblo last Friday so that I could come to this and speak like, okay, I've really seen it now, because I hadn't been through since it'd been completely finished. And it's amazing. It's beautiful. It's wonderful to go through that building and see all the kids doing what they do, all the teachers doing what they do. It's a great little community, and I love it. Both my kids went there. I don't think I mentioned that. And my daughter placed into fourth year Spanish before she even started college. Thank you, Pueblo. Thank you, DLI program. So thank you very much. You want to say a little something?
Good evening. My name is Michael Norton. I have been a member of the SUSD community since 1994, when my first kids enrolled at Aztec Elementary, which is now Cheyenne Traditional School. I had no idea what Scottsdale Unified School District was. I didn't know that there was another district called Paradise Valley that was also part of Scottsdale. I didn't know who our board members were. I had no idea how our budget worked. I didn't know the teachers. I didn't know the principals. All I knew is my kids came home happy and they learned stuff. And that's the condition that I was in until 2012, when a Copper Ridge teacher walked up to me and said, would you please volunteer to be on the Scottsdale Unified School District Budget Committee? It's time that you pay back something to the district for all of the kids that you've run through our schools. She was joking, but not really. And she was right. It was time. I needed to get involved and do something to pay back for all the great things that teachers had done for my kids. Walking into the Budget Committee in 2012 and 13, on the heels of having lost 2 M&O overrides, was a shock to me that I just did not even begin to understand or contemplate. I did not know what an M&O override was. I didn't know what the budget was. I didn't know that we had to go have an election to get the money. All I knew is that our teachers were getting fired, their salaries were being frozen, and we were losing school days, and we were losing specials, and we were losing gifted programs. And all the things that were happening were causing damage to our schools, and we needed to fix it. That was the first introduction. That's the same response that almost everyone has when they first walk into a budget committee of any type at any school district. It's, we do what? And our budget is, and we can't just use all the money for whatever we want? That's insane, and it is. But it is the law, and it's the way we run our schools. And it is so hard to develop enough knowledge about how our budget works and what the laws are and what we have to ask voters for and what we can and can't do with our assets, that it is really a tough learning curve. And it's really important that we never again allow the district to forfeit our institutional knowledge. The Bond Oversight Committee, Dennis doesn't want me to say this, I'm going to say it anyway. It started from a hole in hell. It was the worst event in the history of Scottsdale Unified. It was a tragedy of the greatest consequences, and it needed to be stopped, and it was. And it was stopped in a Bond Oversight Committee meeting. We drew the line, and the state stepped in, and we stopped what was happening. Now, that's all we knew how to do at the time, was to say, don't do that anymore. From that point forward, we learned how to bring systems together that would inspire voter confidence, that would convince voters that they could trust our district to have our taxes spent wisely and efficiently with great oversight. It didn't happen overnight. It took just as many years to build the Bond Oversight Committee's performance level to the level that it is right now as we were in existence. We would come up with a new idea. Shannon's got to be given so much more credit for what's happened in this district. Just astonishing what Shannon was able to accomplish. It took every year of the existence of the Bond Oversight Committee to get to the point where it is today. And today, I'm really proud to say that I got to watch something that was one of the greatest events in the history of Scottsdale Unified School District take place. We went from the worst in the state to the best. And we did it in 5 years, 6 years, however many years it was. Don't ever let that knowledge go away. You're going to have capital improvement projects. You're going to have capital overrides. We're going to need a bond again. You know, it doesn't seem like it's been that long since we rebuilt the high schools, but it has. And they need some attention too, and it's going to take a bond. If we still have that organization and the disciplines that have existed and been built up are carried forward, and a new group joins the committee, goes through a brief mentoring period because we are tired, and then takes over and continues the process and even makes it better, we will always have the support of voters in our district. I don't ever want to see the district lose the support, the confidence of our voter base. It just can't happen again, and there's no reason to let it happen. I would recommend strongly that we make the Bond and Capital Override Oversight Committee, which is our real title, a permanent fixture within the organization of Scottsdale Unified. It's a great program, and I hope you carry forward with it. Thank you very much.
Questions?
Governing board members, this is our time to ask questions or make comments in regards to the Bond Oversight Committee update. Dr. Hart-Wells.
Thank you, President Snowski. I don't have a series of questions, surprisingly. I do wish to express my grateful thanks to Dennis and your team, a lean team, by the way, Shannon and her team, also a lean team, and all of our community volunteers, parents, former students on the Bond and Capital Oversight Committee, and all of the hard work that you did on behalf of our district, our families, our students. I think we saw a nice series of presentations this evening that demonstrate that hard work, whether it's your taxpayer dollars or your sweat equity and your volunteering, is a substantive output for not just our community, but every member in our community, whether you have kids in our school district or not, but also every member of the state. So thank you to all of you. I know it's not been hard, and we appreciate your leadership in the community, and we're looking forward to entertaining perhaps a discussion of the suggestion that was made of continuing that oversight going forward in a more permanent fashion. And thank you for doing all that hard foundational work. The buildings are beautiful, but what Dennis kind of glossed over a little bit was in the middle of all this. The audit committee that the board formed a little over a year and a half ago, facilities was the first audit for the district, and a very public audit, and a lot of great improvements were put into the system while you were still carrying out all that hard work. So thank you. That was not easy, and you did it with a lot of grace. If, as a member of the community, you are skeptical of everything you heard this evening, you need to check out that smart sheet that Dennis referred to on our website, on the district website, and all of the details of every penny that's been spent under this bond. It's really impressive. I would encourage you to take a look at that before you draw any conclusions, or if you're skeptical, rather. But again, thank you so much. We all owe you a debt of gratitude.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hartwells. Yes, I'd like to thank all of the committee members and those that played a role in this. I just want to say something, Dennis. I do believe that the best leaders pay attention and listen and are humble, and I believe that you have expressed that in your work, completing these tremendous projects during a very hard time in our society, on time and at or under budget. So it is miraculous that this was done. But I also think having this bond oversight committee helped keep that in check. Aside from the audit, I think when we have those checks and balances in place, it keeps everyone on their toes and thinking not just to toe the line, but to be creative in processes as well. So thank you to the entire oversight committee members, and to you and your team, and to Shannon and her team. I do believe when we are supporting our finances and our finance initiatives in our district, that we are really supporting our future and our kids' education. They deserve to have great learning facilities, and I appreciate all that has been put in place to provide that, all that we saw and then some. And yes, we do think that some of our buildings are new, but you're talking 20 to 25 years new. So yes, we need to keep the quality and that Scottsdale excellence, that expectation of excellence going. So thank you. That's all I have to say. Anything else anyone would like to add? All right, thanks. We're going to move on. Yeah. And we are going to move on to agenda item 4C, which is the first read of Governing Board Policy BEDB regarding our agenda. Jennifer is at the podium. Go ahead, Jennifer.
Madam President, members of the Governing Board, this matter is presented for a first read. The request was made by the Board President to remove the item board reports from Governing Board Policy BEDB.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. Thanks, Jennifer. Over my tenure as a governing board member, and specifically as a governing board president, I have participated in giving board reports. I've always felt like I was expected to do that. But then I was receiving some input about the board reports, and I started looking at them a little bit differently. And so I'd like to put in place what I believe would be an improvement in our efficiency and effectiveness of our board meetings, and that would be to eliminate governing board reports. My perspective is that our constituents do see us out in the community, supporting our schools. I believe that all of us are holding ourselves accountable to support our district and make ourselves available to the public, and that these governing board reports are not necessary. I recognize this is not a huge ask, nor is it going to create any earth-shaking consequences, but I know that supporting this strategy will improve our effectiveness and efficiency of our business meetings, and that's why I have proposed this point of removing the governing board reports from our agenda. And with that, I'm open to take questions, comments. As this is a discussion, let's discuss it. Board Member Carney.
Thank you, President Sinowski. I'm glad you brought this up for discussion because I had asked for this policy to be amended at the May 2nd meeting when the board approved getting rid of 5 of our public special board meetings. And so, yes, I had asked for an update on this policy, but I think you're mistaken here because what I'd asked for is that we remove superintendent comments, not the governing board reports.
I did not state that we were anything about connection between your requests. This was to remove governing board reports, not to address the superintendent comments.
Okay, I thought you were bringing it to the table too, because I had mentioned it in our public meeting. And I know you're to consider what the other board members are asking for from the dais. So I just don't understand why you would be removing reports from the elected officials. At the table, I was looking at the organizational chart. Today, we are at the top. The elected officials are at the top. And so I'm a little concerned that you're trying to take away the brief minutes we spend at our regular meetings just giving updates. So I just don't understand where this is coming from, and I would like to know what other districts are getting rid of governing board reports, or what other districts have gotten rid of this off their agenda?
I do not know which districts have done that. I don't base my decisions in this work on what other districts do. I try to think about what's best for our Scottsdale Unified School District.
Well, I stick with what I had said at the May 2nd meeting, that I do believe we need to cut down on the agenda because we have removed board meetings, so we have more work to do in the short amount of time we have. And so I had asked for superintendent comments to be removed, not governing board reports, but if you're going to remove the governing board reports, then superintendent comments should go, because ARS 15503 actually states that the governing board may employ a superintendent. We don't have to. So we do, and that's great if we have superintendent comments, but if we are removing governing board reports where we're not allowed to speak, then I don't see why we would continue to have superintendent comments.
I appreciate your commentary here, but that is really creating a new issue out of something, because that was not the intent of removing governing board reports. Dr. Menzel, we all have the opportunity to meet with Dr. Menzel, so as we're meeting out in the community, we have the opportunity to share with Dr. Menzel our concerns and issues that are out in the community, and then allow him to direct the employees and the function of our district to respond accordingly. This has nothing to do with your May 2nd request at all. This is totally separate, and I don't think that people come to the board meetings to listen to our reports. I think it's important that the top employee of our district be given an opportunity to share all the good things that are going on in our district. So that's my 2 cents.
Right, and I'll end with this. Yes, I agree with that, and I also agree that we also should have time in meetings to express anything that we would like to in the short amount of time that we usually do. I mean, a lot of times we don't even share anything, so if we have something to share, we absolutely should be allowed to share it.
Thank you, Board Member Carney. Vice President Werner. Please.
So I'm also glad that this is on the agenda. Our community does deserve to hear from us, and it gives us an opportunity to thank organizations that support SUSD and highlight experiences that we've had on campuses and the greatness of our staff and students. And it does give the people that are in the audience and the people that are watching an opportunity to see our involvement in our schools and with our teachers and staff. This also falls under a value of transparency. While I do think a time limit of 2 to 3 minutes would be an adequate and appropriate change to the time allotted, it's the same time allotted for the public comments, and that should be plenty for the board members as well. And I will add that I believe the intent to remove this altogether is yet another attempt at the ongoing effort to silence minority board members, such as February 6th at the direction of Dr. Menzel, February 21st at the direction of Dr. Menzel, and June 11th at the direction of Dr. Menzel or the board president, and August 8th executive session at the direction of a board member, followed by a public motion by the board president. So I will not support the removal of this item on the agenda. However, I'm very open to supporting an amendment to put a time limit on the board reports that we can still continue to share our experiences and what's going on in the district. I think it's positive for not only for us as board members, for our community and our staff. And additionally, if it was to be removed, there's nothing to stop a board member from exercising their right as a parent or community member to sign up and speak during public comment. It would just be awkward. So, thank you.
Can you please share what you meant by silencing minority board members? What does that mean?
So we're a fractured board. We're a 3-2 typical board. So the minority board members would be the minority votes, which would be the 2. That's standard practice of articulating the way our board is.
That's a very interesting narrative, because I make decisions on what I feel is in the best interest of supporting our district public schools overall, all of our employees and our students. And so I don't see whether I'm on the plus end or a minus end of a vote decision. I don't consider any board member to have more voting power, if you will, or more say in what goes on. So that's concerning that you refer to someone who would not be on a majority outcome vote as a minority board member. That's concerning to me.
Well, our legal counsel has also referred to us as minority voters or minority board members. It's fairly standard practice. And now I don't think that it has anything to do with being in the majority or the minority, but there is an active
Those are your
attempt to
terms.
silence us. So this is my opinion. I don't support getting rid of it. I would absolutely support putting a time limit on it. And, the silencing has to stop because it's bleeding into our schools as well.
Any other questions or comments? Dr. Hartwell?
I would like to speak, thank you. Thank you. Yes, thank you, President Sanowski.
Sure.
How disappointing. How disappointing. I didn't, when I saw this suggestion, I did not see this as some kind of political lightning rod, but I guess it's going to get turned into one, which may prove the point that we don't need the governing board reports. I'll just as a gut check, most of the time, most of us don't even give governing board reports, so it's not really like it's cutting off anyone's, portal of communication. And you're correct, Board Member Warner, there's nothing stopping anybody on this board from speaking in any other medium. This, in my view, I'd like to see more efficiency in our board meetings. I absolutely support time limits, and this reads right into the next agenda item that I hope to discuss, and one of the reasons that I've made the request. So I'll wait until we get to that one, but a bit stunning, the turn this one has been twisted into. Very disappointing.
Thank you, Dr. Hartwells. And, the reason we have on our agenda information and discussion items is to have those discussions. So I do appreciate being able to discuss this. I am disappointed that this has become a little more toxic than it actually needed to be. It was just an attempt to speed up and, really just keep forward everyone on the same path. And that is not to gain applause or recognition or anything according to what any of us say when we are representing our district here at this dais and out in the community. People can approach us anytime to share information. We can bring that information into our decisions, which is ultimately our voice on this board. So again, this is for discussion. If anyone else would like to share something else, something different, that's great, but this is just a first read and discussion. Board Member Carney.
Thank you, President Snowski. I think it's pretty disingenuous, though, that you're saying this is just to get rid of governing board reports off of everything on the list. And I will say that I met with Dr. Menzel, and he told me that it was because people were politicizing the governing board reports, and that is what was told to me. So now you're acting like it's just we're going to strike one thing. It happens to be the elected officials' voice from the agenda. So let's just be transparent and not be just disingenuous if we want to have real conversation, because this does affect us.
I absolutely do want to have real conversation on this, but I think you're reading something into it, and that was not my intent. To be very clear, my intent was not to shut anyone up or shut anyone's voice down. We have lots of opportunities to respectfully share our interests in this school district. Board Member Werner.
So my comments were my comments, and I have personally never politicized my board reports. I have thought about them genuinely, and because I do want to share with the community, it is important that you know what I'm doing in my work as a board member. And so what I would like to do is I would like to add, since this is a discussion, I would like to add a time limit to the governing board reports of 2 minutes as opposed to striking it. And I would like that for the second read, please.
Madam President, members of the governing board, what I'll do is present 2 versions of the same policy.
Thank you. Dr. Hartwells.
Thank you, President Snowski. I have a question for Ms. McLennan. Could you clarify what you meant by the minority board members? Board Member Warner alleged that you had cast that category. Could you describe, please?
Sure. We were
Thank you.
discussing a specific vote, and in that vote, Ms. Werner was in the minority section of the board, and that she was not in the majority section of the vote. I don't remember what the vote was, the discussion of, so.
So just to clarify, you were speaking about whether a outcome was passed or not specifically referring to someone's political ideology, which is the inference here.
No.
Thank you.
And I believe that's the same way in which Ms. Werner's using the term as well. But
That
I
is
don't know. I
correct.
don't want-
That is correct. I'm not trying to politicize anything, and it was referencing the conversation that you and I had. Thank you.
Board Member Carney.
Thank you, President.
Board Member Carney.
Thank you, President Snowski. Since we're talking about amending this agenda policy, then I also think it's a good time to talk about limiting the time on the students and staff recognition and celebrations. I heard from a lot of the community on February 21st how long those celebrations were, and people have, they do want to be involved, but we can't go over an hour the beginning of our minutes. So I would like us to discuss and consider putting a time limit as well on those.
Dr. Hartwells.
Thank you, President Zanowski. Given that very few mediums in this community celebrate our students and staff, I would be opposed to taking out once a month an opportunity to celebrate the extraordinary achievements of our student and staff. We all said that's why we're here, right, is for our students. And so it seems a bit punitive to tack efficiency onto sculpting and limiting student and staff recognitions. I guess, the downside would be, or the silver lining of that, of your suggestion, I see as, well, we just have so much to celebrate. That's a great thing. I'm not sure why we wouldn't want to do that, particularly in meetings where sometimes they can get, unnecessarily contentious. So it's a good touchstone to remind us why we're here and why we're not here. So I just, for my own, as a parent, as a former teacher, and as a member of this community, I enjoy profoundly that segment of the meetings, and I think we'd be doing our community a disservice. You want people to hear from you, then we need to celebrate our students.
Absolutely. I'm not saying we shouldn't celebrate. Absolutely, we should celebrate our students. But we're also, as board members, we are on campuses a lot celebrating students, and parents are coming to the school. So there's a lot of celebrating going on that aren't board meetings, and we need to obviously continue that. I'm just saying, this is what I've heard from the community, that they have asked for a time limit on the celebrations, because some of them can be very long. I did not say we should not be celebrating them.
I'm not suggesting that you said that we shouldn't be, but to pigeonhole it into a time frame.
Excuse me, we expect decorum in our meetings. If you can't abide by that, we may have to recess this meeting.
I'll just say.
I'm sorry for interrupting, Dr. Hartwells.
It's okay. Thank you, President Snowski. I appreciate what I understand to be your intent. It seems punitive to me to penalize and pick an arbitrary number, a minute limit to celebrate achievement. And we're about to talk about KPIs, and I know we're going to spend most of our time on achievement, and we should.
Yeah.
And so those pats on the back, it doesn't cost us anything, a few minutes. I disagree on that proposal. I would consider other things here to, get us to a more efficient use of time. But that one seems punitive to me. Thank you.
Well, I think getting rid of the governing board comments is punitive. And
They're not comments, to be clear, it's board reports.
Governing board reports.
Right.
Excuse me. I think that's punitive, and I just think if we're trying to be efficient, because that's what I heard you say, we wanted efficiency, we need to look at efficiency throughout the agenda policy, not just striking the elected officials from speaking.
All right, thank you. Any other comments on this topic? All right, thank you, Jennifer. We're going to move on to the first read of Governing Board Policy BEDD, Rules of Order. Jennifer.
Madam President, members of the Governing Board, Dr. Hartwells has proposed a change to Governing Board Policy BEDD regarding the rules of order towards the end of that document. We can show it on the screen, thank you, which would propose that Robert's Rules of Order, which is a parliamentary procedure formula for the conducting of board meetings, be used as to assist the district and the governing board in proceeding with meeting forums, meeting participation, making of motions. I did provide to the governing board a summary that I found that describes what Robert's Rules of Order envisions in terms of parliamentary procedure. I can go over that briefly if that would be helpful.
Please do, yes.
In general, some of the things that Governing Board Policy BEDD states are also embodied in, and some of the rules that you are very familiar with and becoming very good at for the new board members are already a part of this board's operation. So for instance, you all are taking turns and wait to get recognized by the board president before you speak. That's part of Robert's Rules of Order. The making of a motion and the seconding of a motion is a part of Robert's Rules of Order. One piece that is not a part of your current practice would be the practice under Robert's Rules of calling for the question. So if there's been if any board member thinks that there's been sufficient debate on a topic, they can call the question under some formats of Robert Rules, and there are different formats of that procedure. Once you call the question, the vote is taken. Other more formalized formats would require you to vote on the call to the question and then vote on the motion. The rules are much more specific about how you amend motions. So it's that there's an order and a cadence to once a motion is made, that has to either be voted on or amended. You have to get permission from the individual who made the original motion to amend the motion. You have to vote on amending it. So there again is a specificity to the parliamentary procedure that would answer questions in some of the situations that the governing board has faced in the past. So, for instance, we had a situation in the past where there were abstentions. If Robert's Rules of Order had been adopted, that question would have been answered with respect to that, whether that vote passed or didn't pass. And so those are some of the parameters. There's various points of order, not just the point of order. There's a point of privilege. Anyone could ask for a point of privilege and ask to be taking a break or to change something about the atmosphere. There's a point of information. You can ask for additional information through a more formalized process.
And Dr. Hartwells had brought this forward, so Dr. Hartwells, would you like to discuss why? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, President Snowski. Thank you, Ms. McLennan, for that summary and some specifics. Use cases where this would be appropriately applied. I just want to point out the language in the proposed amendment is the Roberts rules would come in after the current law and policies. So where there are gaps in the policy and there are gaps in the policies of what to do, then Robert's Rules of Order, which is a very structured dialogue architecture and one that's adopted in most governing bodies across the country, would be an objective source and reference as opposed to, coming up with our own solutions or interpretations that maybe some would disagree with or review, comprehend something differently. So it would be a kind of a plan C if the other two nets or structures that are already laid out, the law and our policies, where there are gaps, there would be some reference that we could resort to for guidance and instruction. I think the previous discussion exemplified why it would be helpful, in my view, for healthy governance for this board to have a more structured reference to be able to rely upon for guidance. And that's all I have to say. This is a discussion item also. We're not adopting anything this evening. I will acknowledge, because it's so structured, it will require basically someone with the parliamentary procedure knowledge to be able to advise us. So, and it would also require, I would think, also the president of the board to have some working knowledge of the architecture. So I acknowledge it's not a perfect fit, but I feel very much like our board, if we're really going to work together, then we need perhaps more structure and more objectivity in the way that the board meetings are implemented. So I'll leave it at that. I'm happy to hear other people's thoughts.
Thank you, Dr. Hartwells. It's a very complex proceeding to follow Robert's Rules of Order. I've been on a board where we've had that in place, and we have had to have a parliamentarian to keep the checks and balance and the meeting flowing using Robert's Rules of Order. I recall Board Member Werner brought her Robert's Rules of Order book, and it's a thick book. Even the cheat sheets are multiple pages with very fine print to follow it. So I question whether, I actually, hearing you say that it would be like, as I understood it, like a structural safety net, that if there are holes in other aspects of our policy or law that aren't covered, that this would be something we fall back on. I appreciate hearing that because I hadn't thought about that as filling the holes. I do think it's very complex and complicated to put in place. I'm wondering if maybe, this is your request of putting this forward, Dr. Hartwells, but wonder if there might be some areas of our board meetings that we can identify have experienced pitfalls. I can think of some. Point of order, like what's happened this evening. We've experienced, I've felt, my feelings are that I've heard snide comments made in our meetings. I think Robert's Rules of Order would help with that because we could call a motion at that point to return order back to the meeting. Speaking out of turn, that consistently happens instead of being called on to speak. And when people speak out of turn, just because your light's on or you're raising your hand doesn't mean you understand the queue that's in place as I see it on my screen on who requested to speak and push their button when. I just feel like I see it like the scales, right? Where in one hand, it would be very difficult for all of us to learn relatively quickly. I do feel like we would need a parliamentarian on hand, someone who can check and balance us as we work through transitioning if we're going to follow Robert's Rules of Order. But I also see that it could alleviate, understanding a structure of a business meeting a little bit better, and that this isn't just like, loosey-goosey or whatever someone's thinking, they get to say whenever they want. So the structure I would support. So maybe there's something we can all think about, since this is a first read and we're having a discussion, think about ways in looking through Robert's Rules of Order, some agreements that we could put in place that we would support as a board. Just throwing that out there. Board Member Warner.
Could you clarify the item at on the previous agenda item that you referenced where this could have helped? And I'm just asking for clarity of which part that is. I've got 4 questions.
Are you? Yeah.
Dr. Harwells.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Dr. Harwells.
Thank you. I believe you're asking, when I made reference, you had suggested you would be agreeable to a time limit on governing reports, and I made reference to that, and that's what I was referring
Okay.
to, is that something along these lines where everybody is limited equally, and it moves things along
Okay.
because you have X minutes. So that was what I was
Okay,
referring to.
thank you, I appreciate that. I think the Robert's Rules as a whole is fine, but if we're going to adopt Robert's Rules, I think that we would have to do it as a whole and not just piecemeal it, because right now our policies around the voting methods and the way we run our meetings is, outside looking in, coming into a new board is very hodgepodge. And so I would be open to having it changed across the board. I do have concerns. I think that if we were to do that, we would need to have a retreat and get full training. And my other concern is just looking in the past of how meetings have happened with the call to question item on the attachment for Robert's Rules, where discussion can be ended with someone calling it into question and then going for a vote. I could see that being problematic, considering a few times President Sanowski has cut off Board Member Carney while she was still speaking or did not call on her. So those are my concerns, is that there wouldn't be a fair time for everyone to get their comments, suggestions, or questions out. So that would have to be handled very delicately so that we could ensure that we would still be able to, everybody else still be able to speak. And again, this would require a lot of training. I don't support having a parliamentarian adding one more person in here. I think that is just going to add to the chaos. And, but it's a great discussion, and I'll send some input to you in an email as well. So thank you.
Board Member Carney.
Thank you, President Sanowski. Yep, you basically asked, my questions that I had, or made the statements I was going to make, but I do have a concern with the same exact number 5, that question, like you said, because of past experience, and I just want to know who will be monitoring it. Will that be council, or who will be monitoring that doesn't, that's not used as a tactic to shut down board member voices?
Are you referring to the question to
question.
end debate? That would have to be a vote of agreement of the board doing it, and then when there's a request to end debate, you vote on that as a board. Dr. Hartwells?
My understanding of, I think you're both referring to the number 5 in terms of the
Correct.
call to question. And fair enough. My understanding how this would work would be that, and this was, I think, what Ms. McLennan was referring to, is there was going to be a few steps to get to an ultimate outcome, and that would be here. So let's say we're talking, Board Member Lindsay decides to call the question, we would have to vote on that. So it'd have to be seconded. And our board policy requires all votes to have to a second anyway, and that wouldn't go away. It would have to be seconded, and then we would all vote, and it would have to pass by 2/3, which I guess that's 4 people. That's a lot. That's a pretty high threshold just in debate. And then if it failed, then we continue debate. So that, and that's actually the kind of structure that I am hoping that might help. So, I mean, it's a good question. The point would be to normalize the discussion so it's more equitable and frankly more formal. I think things start to go off the rails a little bit when we lose our formality and forget that, we're in a formal role. So I've done it too. I'm not casting aspersions, but I'm looking for solutions so that we can embrace healthy, good governance. And so that, again, the impetus. So I hope that, Ms. McLennan, if I misunderstood how this would work out, please correct me. Thank you.
Madam President, Dr. Hartwells, I think that you have adequately summarized what is called for under the most formal version of Robert's Rules when there is a call for the question.
Seeing that there are no more requests to provide input, looks like we will move on to agenda item 5A, and that would be the approval of KPIs and performance targets. And Dr. Menzel?
Thank you, President Sanowski, members of the governing board. I want to first start by saying thank you for the conversation we had a week ago Tuesday, and I again want to express appreciation for my team and all the work that was done to prepare the proposed modifications to the KPIs, and subsequent to the feedback and participation of the governing board in giving information to Dr. Benson, we have updated the document even further. I think it's important to set the context for our discussion about the key performance indicators, because there seems to be a little confusion, and that is everything in our strategic plan and in our key performance indicators is designed to improve academic outcomes for our students. There isn't a thing in the plan that exists except for that it helps advance opportunities for student success. We have a culture and climate goal because the culture and climate matters with respect to improving outcomes for students. We have an attract and retain talent goal because attracting talent impacts student achievement. We have a community partnerships goal because those opportunities help springboard our students to future success. If we didn't optimize resources, we wouldn't be able to produce the kinds of academic results that are our top priority. So I think when we talk about the recommendations and the key performance indicators for the 23-24 school year, we start by saying that it's all about student achievement. And the key performance indicators are identifying the key benchmarks within those subsets that help drive those improved outcomes for students. You'll see that the recommendations are heavily focused on goal number 1, which is academic excellence, but all of the others are designed to support academic excellence as well, and I think that's the message that's really important for us to think about as we take the next step in improving the recommendations in front of you this evening. And with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Benson.
Good evening, Madam President and board members, Dr. Menzel, and all here with us this evening. I too think that I wanted to thank our board members for the participation and the feedback and insights and reflection that's been shared over the course of the month of August, and our team members for their response in doing so as well. I don't need to make an additional statement. I think Dr. Menzel has set this up in terms of what kind of recommendation that action item is here this evening. We are asking our board members to approve the proposed KPIs, performance targets, and priority KPIs reflecting board members' feedback and input over the month of August. First introduced August 8th, discussed at length last week at our study session, and then brought to you this evening as a second read. And I'm happy to respond to questions that might.
Dr. Benson, I noticed on one of the sheets that there was a request, the district administration requests that the board extend this target to September 12th. What is that referencing?
I'm going to need to look it up. Let's check on it. Can you tell me which area you're looking in?
Yes, it's under the action item itself at the bottom, the very last sentence of the cover sheet, the approval of KPIs and performance targets. So the black and white sheet that's in our agenda.
Madam President, would you mind reading that to me? I don't have that in front of me right now.
So I know what this is about.
Okay.
So previously, when the governing board had approved action related to performance pay for certain additional employees, the board action indicated that that would be done by the end of August. Well, without having the key performance indicators approved, it's
Got
very
it.
difficult to develop performance pay plans for
Yep.
those individuals. And so this simply moves that presentation and recommendation to the September 12th meeting following approval of the KPIs.
Thank you, Dr. Menzel. I appreciate that clarification on that date. So we will be approving the KPIs tonight, and then those will be used to create the performance objectives for administration, correct?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions from governing board members on this? Board Member Carney.
Thank you, President Snowski. I have a couple questions, Dr. Benson, and I just wanted to have you clarify. On culture and climate, the very last KPI was increase the number of extracurricular and co-curricular activities. I had, in one of my emails with you, I had asked that we remove clubs because we cannot use clubs as a district goal because they're student-led, they're supposed to be student-led, and that would not be possible for us to add clubs. So if you could just consider that, removing that from that KPI, please.
Hang on just one second. I'm going to see if I can bring that up. Appreciate the question. I believe if we look at the right in the performance target, we did respond to that and reflect that what we would measure, Board Member Carney, would exclude clubs. So kept the KPI there to talk about the increasing aggregately. This is the language that was used previously, but changed the performance target to measure just what you requested right there, increasing the number of sports or co-curricular activities offerings by at least one at grades 9 and 10, excluding clubs from that measurement.
Okay.
I appreciate the distinction.
Yeah, I just still see it under the KPI, so I just wanted to clarify if that works or not. And then the other question I have is under optimized resources. Tell me
We got it.
You ready?
Yep.
Okay. If you can look at the, I guess it's the third, the increase per pupil classroom spending resource categories. On the document we had prior to this, it talked about decreasing plant operations by 0.5% because the plant operations is where we get security, where we pay security from, and it says it includes the impact of increasing security positions. So I don't see that on this final draft, and I want to know if that still stands. Is that still the plan that you want to, the district is looking to reduce plant operations, which would impact being able to increase security positions?
Madam President and Board Member Carney, I appreciate the clarified question again. So based on feedback, we switched up the performance target to only be measuring the categories that impact instruction, the top 3 that are highlighted there, and we took out that other language.
Okay, perfect. I just wanted to verify that because I know a lot of parents in our community are looking for security at their elementary schools, and I want to make sure we don't hinder ourselves in that if we do want to move forward with that. So thank you.
Appreciate the questions.
Dr. Hurwells.
Thank you, Board President Snowski. Dr. Benson, if we could go to the academic achievement section, please.
We got it.
I appreciate all the feedback that you've integrated into the revised KPIs. Sincere, I think, integration. I appreciate it. I wanted to talk a little bit about the earning a C or better in the Algebra 1 by the 9th grade, by the end of 9th grade. So the breakdown, the baseline data, and then in the aggregate 75%, and the performance target being 76% or higher. So I wanted to just understand kind of the reasoning for the 1%, and particularly if you could tie it back, because I think these are not mutually exclusive, but rather synergistic of each other and will flow down, but the KPI just north of the one we're talking about, the second one, which is the minimally proficient, raising that, kind of that high tide raises all ship approach. And I do see them working in concert. Could you just speak to the proposed target?
Yes, Madam President and Board Member Hartwells. Trying to fold in the feedback from all of our board members, we wanted to be very inclusive of metrics that had been asked, and we also wanted to respond to feedback about using increase versus maintain or increase. So in every area, with the exception of KPI performance targets where we were already scoring at 90%, we took off the word maintain and put increase, and so that's why we went 76 or higher there. But we also included additional baselines based on governing board members' interest in monitoring not just the Cs, but also the number of students that are receiving As and Bs as well.
Right. So do you have an idea, and Ms. Crozier may have the number, ESSER funding, could you give us an idea of how you see deployment of those remaining resources since we're in our last year of ESSER 3, and how that may be deployed in a way to achieve these math improvement KPIs, and actually it would be tied to the Auditor General's breakdown of classroom support. So it could
Correct.
kind of
Do
hit
you want me to
three
take a
birds
start,
with
and
one
you-
stone there.
So, great question. We actually have a B memo to recap ESSER 2 expenses and ESSER 3 expenses, and the future plans for ESSER coming up in the weeks ahead in September, towards the end of September. The complexity of that has been kind of fun. We were awarded 3 of the 4 grants that we applied for last spring, and that's allowed us to move some dollars when we have summer school funding that is intended for that, that's also in here, that we can actually expand things like your, speaking to Dr. Hartwell's math supports in terms of intervention supports, small group instruction, tutoring supports, resources and tools. So we've also got an increase in supports at the middle level in a role we're introducing this week. So there's a plethora of supports targeting middle level math, and an early release tomorrow that kind of kicks off the next layer of that as we're pulling our middle level math teachers for a full day of targeted PD and support. So lots more details to come with that in our B memo, showing where we're at with closing out ESSER 2 and future plans for ESSER 3. Shannon, did you want to speak to this too?
So we are just in the process, we're just now closing out, we had our final pay last week. Not that there's necessarily ESSER payments in that final pay, but we're still closing out last school year. And looking at where we are with ESSER 3, I think it's going to be somewhere in the ballpark of about $7 million to spend, which is considerably more than what we've been spending each year from those areas. We've identified some things that we need to reallocate. So example being, there was about $900,000 that we had originally put in for indirect cost. We're no longer doing that. And so there's $900,000 right there that we'll be saying, okay, where do we need to redirect that towards student achievement? So as we're looking at that, I mean, directly and indirectly, there are still several $1 million to go towards that. But even looking at, we have a person right now paid out of ESSER that does our data and pulls this information for us. That's not exactly in the classroom, but that's the person who tells us how we're doing and where they're seeing things go through. So as we're looking at it, like I said, there's about $7 million that we think for this next year. The vast majority of that will be going towards direct, how do we improve, be it through tutoring or offering other supports. And then there's some things that we have got to look at and say, okay, we had originally allocated some money towards this, let's reallocate that more so to other things and realigning how some of that spending goes. As I said, we've got to figure out, we're still spending more next year, or this year that we're in, than we had been previously. So we'll be sitting down and reevaluating where we're going to end the year at and assessing what needs to happen this next year with it.
Thank you, Shannon. So it sounds like there is a bolus of resources that can be used to deploy this school year for moving the needle on these math KPIs, as well as, of course, all of them, but in particular, some additional supports. It's not mutually exclusive from the optimized resources where the Auditor General's relative ratios of expenditures would then, as a consequence, be met, right? So,
Correct. We have a host of site-level positions supporting math and reading across the organization too. That's part of ESSER 3 plans too, that positions are filled, and they're doing that work now as well.
okay, very good. Well, I look forward to seeing most of that remaining funding going to meeting these academic achievement KPIs. Let's see here, I had one more. Yes, this question is for actually Dr. Menzel. Under optimized resources, one of the KPIs is increased student enrollment. Can you speak to, given we've started the school year, how you see moving the needle on this KPI?
So when you look at the KPI as it's currently framed here, when you take into account where we are at the present moment and our efforts to continue to invite students who are on our wait list into our programs, as well as our continued effort to market our schools to grow enrollment, we anticipate that we should be able to get to the 100th day with more students that are enrolled than we currently have. So we can grow enrollment. Do I think we can get back to the level we were at the end of last year? Given the number of graduating seniors versus incoming kindergartners, I don't think that's a realistic target. But I do think it's realistic to say that we will have more students at the 100th day than we have now. I think there's a path forward to do that. There's also some challenges with respect to families not wanting to move after their students have been in school for a period of time. But there are also some logical transition points. It could be at the end of a quarter or at the end of a semester. So depending on what what students are experiencing in other educational environments, we have an opportunity to welcome them in. Under Arizona open enrollment laws, the open enrollment period is rolling. It is not something that's stagnant. So we're required to create the wait list as soon as there's a vacancy. So let's say a family moves out of Scottsdale, there's an opening. We contact the person on that wait list to invite them in. They may or may not accept given the situation that they're in at the time, but we're constantly looking to grow our enrollment, invite students to be part of the Scottsdale Unified School District family.
All right, thank you. So you do see a path forward? Yes. Okay, very good, thank you. Sorry to jump around here, but I wanted to go to the culture and climate KPIs, please.
We're ready. We've got it.
So the Arizona Youth Survey is referred to in a few of the KPIs, in particular protective factors and risk factors as students, perception when they complete those surveys. One of the KPIs is directed to, wait, did we take that off? Oh, no. It's on 6 and 7 in this spreadsheet. I wonder, since spring is when the Arizona Youth Survey will be taken by the students, right? This coming spring? Is that right?
Correct.
What efforts are underway now in order to achieve these outcomes that are here?
Appreciate the question. I'm going to queue up and tee up my colleague, Dr. Sakos, but as she's getting ready to respond, this is a carryover KPI and performance target from the year before, too. So thank you, Dr. Sakos.
Thank you for the question, Dr. Hartwells. First, I think it's important to explain what the risk factors and protective factors are. So risk factors, they break it down in 4 different areas: the peer, individual, family, the school risk factors, and then the community risk factors. So for instance, for peer individual risk factors, those are things like my peers think it's cool to smoke or to vape. And when you talk about family risk factors, these are Students live within a home in which there is a lot of conflict. School risk factors would be that low commitment to school. They're not connected to the school, not engaged, not participating in extracurricular or co-curricular activities. And then the community risk factors would be they don't feel comfortable being connected to their community. They don't want to go to the Boys and Girls Club. They're not engaged in pro-social activity. And so when you think about the protective factors, the converse, my peers don't think it's cool to smoke. We see something, we say something. Connection to school, we want to be connected to school, increase in extracurricular activities. So if you think about what we're doing with MTSS and many of the KPIs here, that's what we're trying to do is engage our students to be a part of the school community. And that is one example of how again, increasing the participation in extracurricular activities. And even though it's hard to measure clubs because they are student-based each year and they may fluctuate from year to year, but encouraging students to be a part of an activity or a club. So that's just a couple of examples. Overarching, as we're trying to work with students to decrease risk factors, those are our Tier 2 and Tier 3 intervention supports that our social workers and our counselors, community specialists work with our families on. And then those protective factors, again, those are resources we can help families with, but we can also do things in our schools with our teachers, with the staff to increase and help with student engagement in the school.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Sakos, and thank you for giving a high-level description of what that data and the granularity of that data, what it looks like for those that have not kind of dug into the Arizona Youth Survey, which is a very rich source of data. But I'm really hopeful that these efforts will start to move the needle because the survey responses over the last few iterations, have signaled kind of a flashing red light there for us. So I'm glad we're being responsive to it, and I appreciate the description. The last thing, this is kind of kicking back to the academic excellence, there is a KPI on that advanced class enrollment in the different demographics. And while I appreciate that we have already, the students registered in January for their courses this year, so I would just ask that there please be focus teeing up going into registration this in January of 2024 for the following school year, that there be focus to achieve this KPI where there's substantive and significant improvements in the enrollment numbers across all demographics. And in particular, and we saw the U.S. News and World Report rankings come out again, and you saw, again, the data keeps showing if the students are in the class, they do well. They do well. We have to get them there. So I would just ask that some energy be put into that in January when the students start to enroll for their classes for next year. Thank you.
Noted. Appreciated.
Board Member Warner.
All right, I got a few things. And so we talked briefly at the board meeting before the 22nd about the process of which you come with the KPIs and the implementation of it. And this is the same system that was used as last year, is that correct?
To establish the KPIs?
Yeah,
Did I hear
and
you
then
say
to
that?
build them out, okay. And I do want to follow up on what Board Member Carney said regarding security. I think it is important that we ensure that they're fully funded and that there's not a cap on that. And I am a absolute diehard believer in funding our classrooms first, and we just want to make sure that security is handled as well because it's a hot topic right now in our community.
I appreciate that. Can I respond to your first question just briefly before we forget, or I forget? I think the process has been very similar. There was a little bit more of an extensive retreat-like conversation when we were identifying KPIs and performance targets last August, but one area that has been different, there was more conversation about where we were going to land with priority KPIs, and this time we invited our board members to indicate, via email, send independently your thoughts. And so just wanted to clarify that process because I think that's been a really good one. 20 different KPIs received at least one vote. 9 KPIs received 2 or more. And so it was pretty easy to come up with a list of 9 and whittle it down from the robust list that we had last year. We received feedback that we likely had too many priority KPIs to be focusing on last year. So just wanted to clarify that process was a little bit different, and I think it proved effective for this board in determining the recommended priority KPIs.
And do you plan to follow the same implementation process in achieving these KPIs as you did last year?
I think that's a great question. I think it would depend on the KPI because some require different approaches, and we're constantly evaluating that.
Okay. And we're using ECRA to hold our data. I sent an email about this earlier, and I was asking for the contract and the amount we pay for that.
So can I answer that question? So it's not that they hold our, it's a data dashboard. We enter the information, and they have created the template for us to be able to put that information out there. So it's a reporting mechanism in a way that's visually appealing so that the public can track our KPIs. It helps with our transparency.
Okay, thank you. So top companies have typically 10 KPIs or 2 per goal. And my concern here is that, I actually find it illogical to believe that 35 KPIs can be effectively measured and achieved. And that's, I counted them today, but it's 35 that we have in front of us. And there are some really good KPIs that I'm very supportive over, that the accountability can be measured, but the vast majority don't. And I would rate the system based on last year's results as a failure. And I think we're getting set up to fail again this year. So attempting to shoot for 35 KPIs is unrealistic. And we have to stay focused on what we can measure and what matters, which is academic achievement, enrollments, and teacher retention and recruitment. So I'm not going to support this vote today beyond the lack of accountability in these systems, and it overburdens our frontline staff, taking away from the primary mission of educating our Scottsdale students on a world-class level. I've had many conversations with our staff from elementary, middle, and high schools, and they're not supportive over this. I feel this is a convoluted process, and the additional weight that's placed on our staff is just part of the disrupt and dismantle model. And I think that we can do better, and we can narrow the focus and take some of the weight off of our staff so that we can benefit our students. Thank you. Oh, actually, I have one more thing.
Go ahead.
Call me? Okay.
Go ahead.
And I will say one thing that was a big concern was on optimized resources, and I did email you about this. Increase the embedded time for teachers to plan and collaborate. What they wanted was the stipend for the hour to do it on their own. And if you're going to collaborate with somebody from a different school, that would be a much better way to do it than having for them to organize to have it be during class time. Thank you.
I appreciate the commentary that's been put forth. As a certified career educator, I do have a lot of experience in identifying the needs, values, and impact of the education work. And it's disturbing to me when we don't trust the experts that their job is to oversee pedagogy, curriculum instruction, assessment, student support services, safety, statistics, data. All of these things help to embrace the success of our students. I feel like I'm hearing talk out of both sides of one's mouth by saying it's too much stress, yet last meeting there was comment of it doesn't matter, the culture and climate doesn't matter, and community partnerships don't matter. All that matters is academic excellence. Those that are on the front line do feel the pressure. Absolutely they do. But it's part of our role here as governing board members to spread that responsibility out. And it is about accountability across our entire district for every employee. It doesn't matter what your role is. Everyone has a role in these KPIs. These are not just focused on putting pressure on our teachers. Those who apply those strategies and those methods to address the KPI, it's not just our teachers. I think we're continuing to create and perpetuate issues that don't exist in our district when we stop trusting the experts and those that are hired to be experts in this district. I appreciate all the work that's gone into this. I think this process has improved since last year. I felt like as a board member last year, we sat in a room and I felt like a lot of the work had already, and decisions had already been decided, which is fine as long as the students are at the center of everything we're doing. And I feel that does exist here. So I appreciate every employee who has had input, every parent that has had input, every community member that has provided feedback. I'm not going to pretend that I know the pulse of every community member in this district. That's just false. But I do know that the people that are here tonight and the people that work in our district and the parents that send their kids to our district trust the experts to make the best decisions. And I support our KPIs 100% simply because of that. And at this point, I'd like to make a motion to approve these KPIs and performance targets for the 23-24 school year. Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
Seconded by Dr. Hartwells. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Board Member Werner was the only opposition vote. Everyone else approved the KPIs and performance objectives for the 23-24 school year. Moving on to the next item on our agenda, which is adjournment. I make a motion to adjourn this meeting. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Dr. Hartwells. All in favor to adjourn this meeting, say aye.
Aye.
That motion passes 5-0. The meeting is adjourned at 8:44 p.m.